What's going on, guys? Andrew of New Bark Gaming back here, and today I'm joined by my friend Logan for the introductory episode of the New Bark News Podcast, where we talk everything in terms of video games, from news of what's happened this past week, then a little bit of what we're playing, and kind of a certain topic story for the day. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Logan.
What's up?
Alrighty, so starting off for today's thing, I know we wanted to hit a little bit on the Metroid Prime 4 development change, right?
That's right.
So
we recently got news, either today or the other day. My sleep schedule's been off, so I don't know what time is. But recently, Nintendo came out and announced that Metroid Prime 4's development will be completely restarting, with Nintendo being joined by Retro Studios, the co-developers of the previous Metroid Prime games.
And they were the ones on the first two for GameCube, and then the ones on the Wii, right?
The first two were on GameCube. There was one on the Wii, and there were a couple spin-offs. I think one of them was on the DS with Prime Hunters.
Right, and I don't think those ones involved Retro Studios.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to make sure, because I'm like, the good ones were Retro Studios, right? Not the ones that were like 1.5D with edgy teenage Samus and all the other stuff.
Yeah.
You know, my favorite adaptations. I think this is great news. I haven't played any of the Metroid Prime games, but I have played some of the earlier Metroid games, like the original, or I'm sorry, I didn't really play a whole lot of the original, but I played Zero Mission, which was basically an outright remake with some updated graphics. Then I played a decent bit of Fusion, some Super Metroid, had a blast with all those, and I've been looking forward to trying out Metroid Prime, especially now that I have a Switch and know Metroid Prime 4 is coming out. Have you played any of these in the past?
Oh yeah, I have Metroid Prime Trilogy on the Wii.
Oh, nice.
They're amazing games, and I actually have to say the motion controls are actually an improvement, at least for me.
Dang. That was one thing I always felt like with the Wii, when they got it right, the gameplay felt really smooth. Like, really good example of it, I always thought was Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword.
Oh yeah, I've been playing through that one recently.
Yeah, I don't think I ever beat it, but I'm glad to hear they fixed that with the Prime games. So what's the general idea of, like, story for that, for those of us that are ignorant like myself on them?
Well, the general premise is that Samus is a terrible pilot, and she crashes her ship into different planets, and for one reason or another, she can't get it back off. And sometimes her suit pieces will scatter everywhere, and sometimes she needs to eliminate a threat that's been entrenching on the Galactic Federation's territory.
Awesome. And these are the games... Is this where Ridley originated? Was it from Prime, or was it from Super Metroid?
I believe it was Super Metroid.
Okay, yeah, but Ridley returns here. No,
yep.
I'm glad that they're moving it to the new developers, and I know Nintendo's also famous for a quote that's like something along the lines of, it's better to delay a game because then there's still the potential for it to be good than to put it out a bad game. And I feel like, generally speaking, they've got a pretty good track history to back that up. I trust them a lot as a company that if something's delayed, it's probably a good thing and not just spelling out its doom.
Yeah, at this point, I think it should just be expected from Nintendo games that they're going to be delayed every now and then. And that's okay.
Exactly.
Because the quote originally went something like, a bad game is bad forever.
Yeah, true. Versus a delayed game still has that chance to be good. I'm hyped for this. It's probably looking at, I think they said something about like a 2021-ish release date, probably. 22.
I haven't heard a date for it, but the sooner the better. I
think that was just like fan speculation based off your typical amount of development time for a game after relaunching it. But no, that's pretty awesome. While we're on the topic of the Switch, the whole idea of, will Elder Scrolls 6 come to the Switch? Thoughts on this?
Well, we've seen tremendous support for the Switch from Bethesda, with them releasing Skyrim, Doom, and even Wolfenstein all on the Switch. So I think the outlook for a Switch port of Elder Scrolls 6 is good.
I agree. My only concern is, if we're looking at from a pure power standpoint, is Elder Scrolls 6 supposed to be coming out this console generation, or is it when the new ones from Sony and Microsoft launch?
I would assume this console generation, but I haven't heard much news about its development.
Okay.
Recently.
Because my concern, even right now with the current generation, is from a hardware perspective, the Switch is still lagging pretty far behind, especially if you're comparing it to like the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X. And I know they were able to successfully port like Skyrim, but also if you're looking at Skyrim, that was a pretty early game from last generation that got ported. Now, don't get me wrong, I adore Skyrim, but still, in terms of power, I'm not sure if it's something that's purely feasible without greatly adapting the game.
Well, they've done so with Doom and Wolfenstein. These are much more recent games that have gotten ports to the Switch. They also have counterparts on the PS4 and Xbox One.
True. I guess my biggest concern is we used to see a lot of times with, say, the DS and Wii, we'd take major AAA releases and then we'd get them ported to the DS and Wii, but the ports were just felt like discount versions of the actual game. Big one that comes to mind for me from my childhood was Star Wars The Force Unleashed. They wanted to put that game on all platforms, right? I grew up playing it on the DS and the Wii, and then I ended up playing it on the Xbox 360 years later, and I felt like I was playing a totally different game. It was dramatically changed. That's not always necessarily a bad thing, but with something like the Elder Scrolls, if it becomes a power thing in terms of the power and the amount of power the Switch has as a console, my biggest concern would be like cutting back on some of the open world or exploration aspects.
I don't think much would change gameplay-wise. It's probably going to be something more along the graphical aspects. We're reaching a point now where hardware limitations themselves are almost becoming obsolete.
True. I think that is an accurate perspective, because that, with my example, that is from like 10 years ago now. It's making me feel old saying that, but that's from like 10, 11, 12 years ago when we were dealing with like Star Wars The Force Unleashed on the Wii and those types of games. So I guess you're right. I mean, once, like you said, the hardware limitations mainly comes down to the graphics. We've got things that are powerful enough now to kind of crank out people's ideas for the game. Now, it may not be in freaking 4K 60 FPS, but if you can get 40 to 50 FPS at 1080p, perfectly fine with everybody.
Yeah. And then, of course, you have the rumors going around about Nintendo working on a new Switch, or a new version of it, but we don't have much information. We should save that for later.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, with that one, just for like a quick splash into my thoughts, I feel like them making a new model would make sense, but them necessarily making a model for better performance doesn't seem typical given Nintendo's history.
It certainly doesn't, but then again, we are seeing things like the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X. Perhaps Nintendo will try to counter those.
True. I'd certainly be up for it, but like you said, we don't have a whole lot of information there. And if Elder Scrolls 6 comes to the Switch, that's awesome. That's probably would be the system I'd get it for, just because being on the go a lot. The Switch is obviously the superior console there. I mean, you have options like remote play on the PlayStation 4, but that's so dependent on the strength of your Wi-Fi connection that it's kind of shoddy. Sometimes it's great, other times it's like, I'm moving once every 30 seconds. So having the instant hardware capability on the Switch is great, and I'm looking forward to it. I hope Bethesda gives us at least some kind of information as to when it gets released.
Yeah.
Now, moving on to our last kind of news story for this one, at least I believe so, would be Resident Evil 2's remaster got released earlier this week.
That's right. And that really put a cork in my thinking everyone was talking about the original.
Now, I personally have never played Resident Evil. Like, I've heard really great things about it, but I've just never gotten around to playing it. I mean, by the time the original series had come out, it was like, it wasn't a time where I was playing a whole lot of games, and when they were coming out on like GameCube and all that type, and all of those systems, it just wasn't something I was aware of. You know, when I was playing GameCube, it was like, get all the first-party Nintendo stuff, check, check, check. And PlayStation 2, it was like, hey, Sly Cooper and Ratchet and Clank, they're things. So I didn't even know Resident Evil existed when I was playing through like the original wave of the game when it was really successful. And then you obviously had stuff like Resident Evil 7, all those things for newer consoles, but I feel like I've been living in a cage with newer stuff too here lately. So what's your history with this game series?
I am pretty much exactly like you in that aspect. I've mainly been caged in with all my good first-party games and stuff like that. Things I knew that were good, but I remember playing it a little bit on, what was it released on? I think the N64 got a port of it a while ago.
I don't remember which one got released on it. I want to say it was the original.
I remember there was a remaster of the original that I think I actually own somewhere, but of course with my PlayStation being dead, I have no means to play it right now.
Right. But, I mean, from what I understand, it kind of set the gold standard for survival horror games.
I have heard that it is essentially a classic when it comes to that.
Right. So, and what I find especially interesting is we're looking at the game. This is essentially just an HD remaster of the second one, right? And this was Capcom's second highest selling launch game on Steam ever. And the only thing it was behind was Monster Hunter World. We're talking about Capcom here. This is one of the big hitters in gaming, and we're talking about just a remake and it's launching and being able to get them that high in terms of sales. So I think that's just a testament to how much this series means to a lot of people. Those of you that aren't ignorant like us, at least, as to it. And I also find it interesting. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
It does say something about the marketing of nostalgia almost as well, because I'm sure a lot of the people buying it had the original Resident Evil 2 on a console way back when. And, to experience that again and remastered surely must be something.
Exactly, and I think that's a growing trend we've seen. I mean, a lot of the best-selling games on newer systems, or at least steadily selling games at the very least, have been nothing but remakes of older games. So part of me almost wonders if in video games we're starting to get to the point in what you see a lot of times in the movie industry, where the amount of new material you have is gradually shrinking, versus a lot of reboots of older things, or in our case for video games, remasters of older things. I mean, there's always the meme of how many times you're going to see Final Fantasy VII be released on a console. I mean, in the past 10 years, how many systems do we have that you actually can't find some means of playing that game on? So, I mean, in the case of Resident Evil, I guess, I don't know if it's going to go that far, but still. And I think it's also a testament to the game that survival horror games as a genre have been really going downhill lately, yet this one still sees success, so.
Yes, unfortunately that is true about those types of games.
Can you blame people, though? I mean, we got crap like that stupid Walking Dead game that came out 5-6 years ago, and then there were, for a while, it was, the thing to make an indie survival horror game, and all of them were just absolutely terrible, and I think it was because of the zombie craze. As soon as Walking Dead took over as a TV show in pop culture, which, to be honest, I never thought it was all that well written, but still, and as soon as that took over, it was everybody was all right, let's make a zombie game. We're going to make zombie platformers. We're going to make zombie puzzle games. We're going to make zombie rom-com games. We're going to make zombie something or another games. And they were all awful. I mean, not all of them, but most of them were absolutely awful. So I think everybody's just kind of gotten sick of the genre, but once more, at least this is selling well.
Yeah. So I did like Zombie U on Wii U.
That I've heard great things about, and that you can find for $5 at GameStop used if your local GameStop has it, and you were one of the 40 people that bought and still owns a Wii U like we are.
I do recommend it to those 40 people out there.
Hey, it's got a lot of good games, and they're cheap right now.
That is very true.
So speaking of good games, and speaking of games that have a legacy, tomorrow, that's right, or I'm sorry, tomorrow if you're counting the midnight release, 2 days from now we have Kingdom Hearts 3 coming out, and that has been a game that's been something like 11 years in the making. But nonetheless, it's being released by Square Enix, and boy does this game have a history behind it, because it's essentially the hybrid of Disney, who basically owns the entertainment industry, and Square Enix's birth child in Final Fantasy. So talking about the biggest RPG maker here and Disney. And both of these have had a slew of games before they ended up hybriding into a series, which are both pretty successful. That's going to be today's topic. Now, what's your experience with Final Fantasy and Disney games?
Well, I've recently been trying to get into Final Fantasy, as a matter of fact.
Same.
I purchased a lot of the remakes and ports for the PS1, I think 1 through 6.
Right,
I tried to get, and I did. And, of course, 7.
I mean, 7's... you can play 7 on anything. I could play 7 on, a TI-84 calculator, probably. But...
Yeah, I jumped straight into that one after I got all those games.
Right.
Because, people wouldn't stop talking about it. And so far, it has been a very pleasant experience, I have to say.
Now, how do you feel about my experience in terms of Final Fantasy is pretty similar in that I picked up a lot of the games recently. The one I delved right into, I believe if we're going off the Japanese numbers, is Final Fantasy IV, but it was released as... let me reference some notes here right quick. It was released as Final Fantasy II in the US, but then also called Final Fantasy IV if you played the GBA port, which is what I was playing. And I agree with you in that I do enjoy the experience. I think there's a pretty decent story there. I haven't played 7 yet, but my biggest issue with 4, and this may have just been a case of, I feel like this is a habit of older RPGs, is it felt very grind heavy. I got like 7 to 8 hours into the game, and a lot of the issue I was having is not that it was hard, but I kept encountering these battles where I had one mage in my party, and the enemies that I was facing were taking literally 1 damage from any attack that wasn't magic-based, and my mage kept being mana-starved, and there wasn't an easy means of obtaining magical items. So my taste for the series soured a little bit towards the earlier games there. Granted, I also did kickstart with 6 at one point, and that didn't seem to have as many issues. I was playing that on the Super Nintendo Classic, called Final Fantasy III in the US, and that one seemed to be pretty good. So I'm definitely up for giving it another shot. I did recently buy Final Fantasy VII through the PlayStation Store as a PS1 classic. I'm really looking forward to playing that.
Nice.
I mean, how's the story so far with that? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, the story is pretty good, at least as far as I've gotten.
Right.
But as you were saying about habits of older RPGs, I do think you're right. A lot of the older RPGs are grind heavy because that was part of their allure back then. Whereas nowadays, we want everything to be quick.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
And I think that makes some sense for the time, too, because it was very much an idea of, we only have so much room on this cartridge, memory-wise, to build a game. What's the best way we can drag out this gameplay?
Exactly.
So you're going to make it grind heavy with the levels and everything else, because that's not taking up a lot of data storage-wise, but it's still getting you that time clock thing.
Yeah, it's still getting the player some hours.
Exactly. So grind heavy or not, I think it's undeniable that this is one of the most impactful RPGs in terms of gaming history of all time. I mean, even if you're just looking at the companies that are now behind, or formerly companies, that are behind it, I mean, they're behind some of the biggest RPGs to this day. You see Square Enix, it's probably one of the best JRPGs coming out for the year.
Oh, right. It's definitely one of the developers I look towards when I want a new game to sink my teeth into.
Exactly. They're just kind of a trusted name in the industry, and that's because, I mean, they've been doing this thing since 1987. That was when Squaresoft started with Final Fantasy, and they were just pumping things out. I mean, the first one was for the NES, then you had 3 for the NES, 3 for the Super Nintendo, then you had 3 for the PlayStation 1, a bunch for the PlayStation 2, a bunch for the PC, everything else, and they've all been massive successes. I mean, all the ones that have come out in recent years have done over 1 million copies in sales, which is just insane.
Definitely.
And like the turn-based system you see there, if you're playing a lot of other RPGs from the time, it's obvious they were inspired by Final Fantasy. I mean, I'm a big fan of Chrono Trigger, and if I'm looking at that combat system and comparing it to Final Fantasy, I'm like, okay, I know Final Fantasy came before this, and I can see all the influences there. It just makes me kind of wonder where we would be today without that influence there.
That certainly is something to ponder.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, and then just everything about this series, it seems more and more interesting to me. I feel like the older I've gotten, the more I've understood its impact, the more I've wanted to get more into actually playing the games for it, which also have a weird enough history. I mean, like, they have everything from action RPGs to the single-player grindfest from the old days. They've put out 2 MMO-based games, which was, yeah, I know, and one of them was on the PlayStation 2. Final Fantasy XI was an MMO for PlayStation 2, Xbox 360, and the PC, and you could do cross-platform play. And this was put out in 2002, man. Like, that's...
Wasn't that one of the games that pioneered online gaming as a whole?
Yeah, it would have been right around that time. I mean, you got to figure the Dreamcast was really the first system that did online gaming. That was only a few years before that, and that was flopping by this time. And then you got to figure World of Warcraft would have been kind of hitting its heyday right around then. So with all that being said, yeah, I think it would have been right in the mix.
Yeah, I've heard stories of people getting addicted to that game, like, you know, to where it was a huge problem.
Right. And what's funny enough about it is apparently the servers are still functional on PC today, which is kind of awesome.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was Final Fantasy XI. Now, my only issue with the MMO thing like that is just when I'm looking at this series and I'm like, I want to play all of these games, as if they ever shut down the servers, then you're just kind of screwed. But I guess the bright side to that is the Final Fantasy games, story-wise, don't exactly connect unless it's like 10 and 10-2 or whatever. So you can just kind of do whatever games from the series you feel like playing, and you'll still be fine, or if you miss an entry here or there. But like,
They used to always throw me off.
I know, when I first saw Final Fantasy before I had any idea what it was, I was like, wait, there's a 10-2? Why wouldn't you just call it 11? And then
I know.
years later, it makes sense.
Friend was getting into something that was like, 13-2. And
Yeah.
I would always ask him, be like, what's the deal with that name? And he's like, it's the sequel to 13. I'm like, so, well, just count upwards.
Yeah, exactly. But the ridiculous naming system, I guess, makes sense in retrospect.
Yeah.
So let's go
But if
ahead.
you ask me, the Final Fantasy developers need to learn what the word final means.
Exactly. I don't think there's anything final about it, the way that their sales have been going. The other neat thing about this series, too, is the amount of different, like, I don't want to use the word fantasy because it's literally in the title, but the amount of different, like, fictional settings that they've touched upon. We see everything from, like, storybooks to steampunk to the future to things that actually resemble the modern world in a lot of ways, just with some, like, fantasy creatures thrown in. They seem to just kind of touch upon everything, and I think that's cool to be able to look at the arts from the different games and see all these different worlds.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a very expansive series with like multiple different worlds and universes. So, in terms of story building, you can't really do much better.
Exactly, and I think that's one of the things that's, as somewhat of an outsider with it right now, I think that's one of the things that appeals to me most about trying the series is seeing all these different worlds, getting to be familiar with all these different types of lore, and kind of throw yourself into something. From what I was doing some research before the video today, and from what I saw, I feel like if you're into RPGs a little bit, and you like some world building, there's probably a world that coincides with one of these games that fits your tastes. Which is awesome. I mean, it's just a lot. I have a lot of respect for this series, despite not knowing a whole lot about the gameplay.
Yeah, I recently got I think it's Final Fantasy 13, or I'm not even sure, but it's on my Xbox One just waiting to be played.
Exactly.
And I still haven't gotten around to it yet, but I've heard good things, and I can't wait till I have some time to dig into it.
Exactly. So let's jump on board to Disney games, the other side of this. We're going to the polar opposite here, considering a lot of Disney games are mediocre. But there are also some classics out there. I haven't played a ton of them, but in terms of like the games themselves, I know the Wii especially had some pretty big hits in terms of the Epic Mickey games. I've heard absolutely fantastic things about those. Once more, I didn't play them a whole lot. It took me a while to kind of get good with the Wii motion controls, and they used to bother me around when those games were first coming out. But I heard those were really awesome. I know back in the Super Nintendo versus Genesis days, the Genesis had a number of really good platformers on there. I played the Aladdin one. That one's really fun. Even if the timing of the controls feels a little awkward, it was kind of standard for the time. And I know that they've recently been kind of having a lot of luck with the Kingdom Hearts franchise, but I don't feel like we've seen a whole lot else from them in recent days. It used to be a much bigger thing, I think, to put out games to go with your cartoons and everything else.
I think there have been a lot of Disney games, but they just don't get the recognition that Kingdom Hearts does.
Exactly. I mean, we are talking about a AAA release.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, that kind of, it's hard to talk about the Disney game subject without delving into the whole idea of movie-based games, considering that's primarily what they're known for at this point. I mean, how many freaking ports of some kind of a Frozen game did we see when that was kind of the big thing going around?
I don't want to count.
Exactly. So I think in terms of the Disney games, we have a lot less to talk about than the Final Fantasy stuff, because it's more of just, I don't want to call it not a game, but it's more of additional merchandising for a different product.
A cash grab.
Exactly. Now, some of those cash grabs are pretty good. It's kind of like Spider-Man 2 before we had Spider-Man for the PlayStation 4. It was kind of your best bet to do something, even if it was nothing more than a game adaptation of a movie. So I think I don't know. Them being in the game industry has always been kind of weird for me. And just because the other thing that's always kind of confused me about it is Disney, as expansive as they've gotten, I'm surprised they haven't made their own outright full game studio. There always seems to be some sort of licensing involved. I mean, for example, with Kingdom Hearts, you have like the Disney Interactive Studio thing, but that's coupled in with Square Enix, so they're making things with them, versus something like Square Enix that outright makes their own games in addition to working with other companies.
Yeah, I'd always assumed that Disney did have their own games publishing.
I could be absolutely full of crap on that, but in the ports I've seen, they've always had, I mean, they have their own companies, but there's usually working with other people and involved in a lot of their bigger releases, at least, like Kingdom Hearts. And
I wouldn't be surprised either way.
Yeah. I mean, the one that I always wanted to try, but never got around to, that looked interesting, was the Disney Infinity series. That was making some pretty big waves when it was out. I mean, it had 18 million expansion packs and filled up all the shelves at GameStop with these little figure things that were essentially the equivalent of amiibos.
Yeah, I do remember seeing those. I always just thought they were like Disney Skylanders.
Right, exactly. But I was under the impression that was like a sandbox game where you could kind of clash the worlds and do what you wanted with it. So that always seemed really neat to me. I think they were kind of hitting a good point there. I think Disney was building on the idea of their fantasy worlds. So
I did have some friends who were super into that.
Disney Infinity, so it does have a good reputation behind it. So that was something. So delving into Kingdom Hearts a little bit, which is where these two colossuses in the world of entertainment end up meeting with each other, we've had probably the biggest fustercluck of a timeline I've ever seen for gaming. I mean, if you're trying to play those things and you don't actually Google a timeline and you play them in order, you're going to be doing like first game, sequel, prequel, in between the first two, somewhere elsewhere, some other thing, an alternate timeline, something else, then it leads into the third game, and it's just an absolute disaster. But in terms of like gameplay and stuff, I've been playing a lot of the first game recently, and I've thought, I played it a lot when it first came out, but then I got stuck on a certain level and never came back to it. Playing it again, I think it's a very well-made game, but much like when we were hitting on with like the earlier Final Fantasy games, I think there's a certain level of clunkiness that comes with games at the time, because it is kind of action RPG based, such as like, there's times where it feels like you should be able to react, and there's just a little bit of a delay on the controls that it's just enough that it throws you off, especially when you're trying to dodge certain things, and figuring out the timing of certain things feels a little awkward. Now, to be fair, I'm also playing it on the hardest difficulty, so some of it probably has to do with that as well, but what's your experience with the Kingdom Hearts games?
Oh, man. The only direct experience I really had with it was watching my sister play it a long time ago.
Right.
I recently did get the first two games on PS2, but as I've mentioned multiple times before, my PlayStation is dead, so I have no means of playing them right now.
No Kingdom Hearts for you!
Exactly. I definitely do know that my friends who are into this game are super into this game.
It's the same thing I've been hearing.
It's like you said, there's this confusing timeline, and there's games that were released about it that I've never even heard of, on platforms that I had no idea that they would release a Kingdom Hearts game on.
Exactly.
It's very crazy. And that's right, there are also the Disney characters in it, which in my mind is even crazier. I'm used to seeing them in like happy-go-lucky cartoons, and now they're in a Final Fantasy-esque action RPG.
Yeah, it's a very weird concept to wrap your head around, and even having just started to replay the first one for a little bit, there's a little bit of culture shock at first, that you're seeing like these anime-styled Final Fantasy characters, which are awesome in their own right, but a lot of them come from these sort of post-apocalyptic types of worlds, standing right next to like Donald and Goofy and Alice from Alice in Wonderland, and it's kind of like, this doesn't seem like it should piece together.
But then again, that sort of stuff usually makes the best games and the best stories, like with Paper Mario and Super Mario RPG, things like that.
Exactly. It's ridiculous enough that it can draw you in just based on how ridiculous it is, but usually as long as it's well told from there, it kind of makes things pretty awesome.
And if it's coming from Square Enix, you know it's well told.
Exactly. And in terms of the games, at least with the timeline thing, while I was mocking it a little bit before, I'm under the impression you can at least mostly pick up on what's going on, even if you skip a couple of the games in the series, because a lot of it has to do with like these sort of side stories that just kind of add some flavor. So I guess it's not too bad there. I mean, if you want to fully understand the picture, you do need to play all of them, but on the bright side, for those of us that own PS4s, we do have Kingdom Hearts The Story So Far, which I highly recommend. $40, you get every Kingdom Hearts game ever made. and their HD forms too, which is pretty cool. But yeah. And the other thing that is interesting here is, like, I know Final Fantasy, from what I've heard, has a tendency to kind of plug in characters from older games just for the heck of it, to kind of, like, hey, you remember that character from Final Fantasy VI? Well, he was the protagonist there, now he's some side character in his alternate form in Final Fantasy XIV, or something or another. We've got the same deal going on here, and actually one of the characters who was, I'm drawing a blank as to his name, but I know he's the protagonist from Final Fantasy VIII, was the one who actually got me to want to try that game, because I saw him in Kingdom Hearts. He seemed really edgy, really out there, and I was like, okay, this is worth giving a whirl. See what happens. But yeah,
marketing at its finest, huh?
Exactly. I mean, that's kind of the sad part about it, is I feel like the Kingdom Hearts games, as fun as they are, do feel like they're kind of just a big marketing device. They feel like they're nothing but big product placement, because it's basically just, this is big, they make no sense together, but if we put them together, they'll sell, because they'll draw people in from both, and then there might be some opportunities for both respective companies to pull people from those fan bases over to their fan bases. It's just, it's a cash grab. But I don't know. I'm looking forward to the release. I plan on going to the midnight release at GameStop tomorrow. They're giving away this awesome cloth poster that comes with pre-ordering it, which will be great to see in action. Also got a nice steelbook if you're one of the people who pre-ordered a Kingdom Hearts console and didn't get screwed over by GameStop for canceling pre-orders. Then you've got a sick PS4 Pro coming your way. It's going to be a good time.
Well, good luck with that.
Tell me about it, man. I feel so bad. Did you hear about that? GameStop was taking pre-orders for a PlayStation 4 Pro, Kingdom Hearts design, everything like that you could only pre-order through them, and then they went and canceled a bunch of their pre-orders on people, like...
Wow, I did not hear about this.
But, like, it's so terrible. You're supposed to be a game company, for one thing. Like, your literal sole focus is selling video games and other nerd merchandise that mainly focuses around that. And you have these people who are hyped to get this game, who probably pre-ordered it for the PlayStation 4, and were probably going to be using the PlayStation 4 they pre-ordered to go with it. Now they can't even get their console. It's a total train wreck.
Wow.
Exactly. So, great.
Are they getting put on back order? Like, what's the story with that? Or are they just outright canceled?
I have no idea. I hope for their sake they're getting put on back order, because that would at least mean something. I would hope with the kind of big names you have behind the Kingdom Hearts thing, that Disney and Square Enix might step in, just because they obviously are involved in the making of the console, since it has their marketing on it, and not let GameStop get away with just canceling the orders, because then it eventually reflects badly on them.
Certainly, if there's enough backlash, something will hopefully happen.
Exactly. So, we can only hope the best for those people. So after touching upon some big franchises, let's go into delve into what we actually have been playing, and not a bunch of games we're just kind of bullcrapping our way through the conversations for. So I've been playing Spider-Man for the PS4. That deserves literally all the hype that everyone is trying to give to it. You feel like you're Spider-Man, everything else. Persona 4 Golden, that is a really good game. Kingdom Hearts, the original, and then a little bit of Bayonetta from here and there. What's been on your gaming plate here lately?
Skyrim and Smash Ultimate. That's about it.
Hey man, nothing wrong with the classics.
Much else.
Nothing wrong with the classics.
Yeah, I had to restart Skyrim, but it's definitely been a cool experience now that I know what I'm doing. Of course, you can never be too good at Smash Ultimate. So
right.
always fun to brush up on that, especially when you go online.
Oh yeah. What system have you been playing Skyrim for?
Switch, of course.
Oh yeah, dude, that's the only system I actually own it for. The first time I played it was on Switch, and I was like, this is great.
Oh yeah. It's so cool to be able to just sit in your bed and play that portably.
Exactly.
It's still mind-blowing to me, because I remember when that game came out when I was in middle school, and it was just like this expansive open world. It was the first time I'd experienced anything like it, and now I can just like go to the store with it, prop it up in class, hope no one notices.
Sit on a river, sit on a bridge, out the window, in the hills,
I can
everywhere.
Play it here, I can play it there.
You can literally go where you're going in Skyrim somewhere in real life, or at least try to. But no, it's freaking awesome just to think about that. I mean, I feel like in the past 10 years, consoles have come so far versus the games that blew our minds are now the games that people are like, you thought that was revolutionary? Like,
Yeah.
and it's just so weird to think about, because Skyrim was definitely one of those games. The amount of hype that was around that game is just incredible. I mean, I remember seeing the people who would call people who played video games nerds, even being like, dude, if you played Skyrim, and then suddenly these like barriers between social constructs are being broken because of this game.
Yeah, I remember when, the so-called, popular kids would be talking about it, and I was just like, oh, wow, they actually play that?
Yeah, exactly.
Hey.
But they were having a blast with it as much as everybody else was. And that's one thing I think games have really been doing really well lately, is I think gaming more so has become so much of an accepted cultural thing that I think it's a good way to bring people together now, because I feel like most people at this point have played video games in some way, shape, or form, and had at least a somewhat positive experience with it, which is just awesome.
Yeah, it's very mind-blowing when terms like, Smash Bros. And Mario Kart are ubiquitous with people, and you can just walk up and either strike a conversation or strike a battle with them.
Exactly. And that's one thing that I think Nintendo really did so well with the Switch, and one reason I continue to hope that basically all games that possibly can be are ported to it. It's because now it goes from just, hey, I can strike up a conversation about Mario Kart with this person, to, hey, I can play Mario Kart with this person. Or if you're in a large group and you have one of those people that says never played it before, they can literally hop right on there if you have your Switch with you. It's incredible.
It definitely is. I hope more developers and companies can put out things like the Switch,
Yeah.
Just spread the ubiquity.
Exactly. As for the stuff I've been playing, man, Persona 4, first Persona game, I love it so much. Like,
wait till you try Persona 5.
It's on my list, my guy. It is on my list. But yeah, just the brilliant mix between, you've got social life, which is kind of its own thing. Social simulator was never something I'd anticipated enjoying in a game, but it's kind of cool. And then you've got a pretty good combat system. It reminds me a lot of Octopath Traveler, even though I know Persona came first. Octopath Traveler was what I played first, in terms of being able to kind of exploit enemies' weaknesses to get them, basically make them miss a turn, then strike them as best as you can. The whole all-out attack thing is really cool. Everything about it just blends really well together.
I definitely liked the theme of self-acceptance in that game. That was something I hadn't really seen before.
Yeah, and it seems kind of cheesy in some ways if you're just talking about it conceptually, but as long as it's well written, I think those types of things work. I mean, like, Grant has the old saying of things that are cliche for a reason, and I think it's very accurate, and the idea of self-acceptance flows pretty darn well into that.
Yeah, I could definitely see that.
And then, like, in terms of other games, man, Smash Ultimate was the one I forgot to put in there. I've been playing that too. I need to finish unlocking the roster. Are you hyped for freaking, what is it? Are they calling it PD Piranha now, or is it just Piranha Plant? She's gone by different names.
I've only seen Piranha Plant, but I haven't been keeping up with it. But I know we're going to get that DLC in just a few days.
Oh, dude, it's going to be great. Adding another character. And if they keep all the DLC free like this, that is going to be so refreshing compared to what we saw in the last Smash game and just generally with a lot of recent games.
Well, remember Joker is coming from Persona 5.
Right.
And that DLC you do have to pay for.
True. I guess the Piranha Plant thing was more of, like, Nintendo owns the property, so they have more power to be able to just give it to you.
Yeah, I think it was more along the lines of, hey, get this game before it's too late.
Exactly. Kind of get that last push from people to do things. But no, that's been a really good game. I'm hyped for unlocking all the characters. They did well with it. But yeah, I think that's going to about wrap things up. Did you have anything more you wanted to throw in there?
I know Travis Strikes Back, or Travis Strikes Again got released.
Oh, yeah. Switch. That was like...
I don't know if you wanted to talk about that.
A week and a half ago. I know that was part of the No More Heroes series, right?
It was sort of a spin-off, from what I understand.
Right.
Not a direct sequel to anything.
Okay. Yeah, I know that game generated a lot of hype around it. I'm not super familiar with the No More Heroes series.
It's typically a very violent hack and slash sort of game.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah. The No More Heroes series I get confused with, like, a gajillion other series. Like there's Legend of Heroes, then there's No More Heroes. There was another one that was like something in Heroes. Like the term Heroes is in so many different game titles. I get them mixed up in my head, so I'm trying to keep track of them. But that's really cool that they're releasing something like that from Switch now that I at least know what series you're talking about here, because I think it shows how much development Nintendo's made in terms of, I remember like with the Wii, the GameCube, the N64, it was like, oh, that's a kid console. You don't see mature games released for that. Well, the Switch has got Skyrim, No More Heroes. There's a bunch of other things that have been released here recently, and I can't remember the names off the top of my head. But we're getting some really gory, like mature content for those of the people who are into that type of thing on the Switch.
Well, to be clear, No More Heroes was released on the Wii along with its sequel, and they were bloodier than this one.
True. But I'm just saying, like, generally, it's cool to see how Nintendo's come that far. I remember back even, like, the SNES and Genesis era, it was a big deal to have Mortal Kombat on the Genesis over the SNES because it had blood.
Same with the port of Wolfenstein on the SNES.
Right, exactly. Versus
I remember
now, it's not a big deal.
It blew my mind when they ported Doom to the Switch, and still one of my favorite games on that console.
Right, because it's like, wait a second, is this the same company that years ago was like, oh, you can't put your game on here, not without censoring it? And now we've got it, so I don't know. I like the way that Nintendo's developed with that. But yeah, I think that'll about wrap things up. We'll catch you guys next week with some more New Bark News podcast. Shoot, gotta do some